Okay, in this video I'm going to go over the exam responses to help you think about what the best answers were. You should reflect on what you did and how you can improve for the rest of the semester. So this is not just about the grade you got for the midterm, but this is also about how you're going to organize your information for your remaining assignments. And so we want to move from a monological information model where you are focused on just thinking about what your opinion is and then finding information that supports that, to moving to a dialogical information model, which is the basis for participatory politics and what people who designed the United States Constitution and the democratic system believed that citizens would participate in, that they would dialogue with one another, that they would engage in feedback. They would look for information that could be what's called falsifiable, so you're able to prove whether it's right or wrong, so it's not really about opinions, it's about facts. And so you want to start exchanging facts and then building opinions on those facts as you agree with them with each other. So it's really looking for more of an agreement and less of a quote-unquote compromise. This will also help you understand better the structure of the system as it is today and why it's failing, and especially when you start thinking about where topics of the most control, right, where people are trying to control other people, or where they're trying to influence other people, and where there's the struggle of unequal groups. And then finally, you need to be able to evidence your position, so you need to find these facts, and you need to be able to show me that you understand how to do this in this intro course. This is one of the things that you're required to do for the college. They want you to be able to argue a position and use evidence to back up your position in this class. So this is one of the early questions in the exam. So here's a good example of what the structure of argument that we're looking for. So this actually came from your prep doc. And so you see it's the logical conclusion. So logical conclusion is the thing that comes after a statement of facts. So you see here in week 1 you had A and B, those were the facts, and then it leads to a logical conclusion. This is the kind of format that you need to be getting used to in college, and that's what we're practicing in this class. So a lot of people got this question wrong, which is curious. But if you want to go back, you want to understand that the critical race theory is a cross-disciplinary intellectual and social movement of civil rights scholars and activists who seek to examine the intersection of race, society, and law in the United States, and to challenge mainstream American liberal approaches to racial justice, largely that focus on just reform, like you just need to make people nicer and then there won't be any racism in America. These scholars have shown why that won't work. And they're focused on restoring the participatory nature that folks like Thomas Jefferson and others talked about when they talked about inalienable and fundamental rights. And that includes, and really is the most important right, is the right to be able to participate in the system and being able to be equally heard and have your say actually implemented in life and not just heard and laughed at or dismissed. And so you want to be able to understand why this is important, and this is from the exam, right? It's about moving beyond domination and control. It's not allowing the situation to be unequal. It's saying there's a process, and it's the democratic process that's supposed to bring this about. In fact, the Federalist Papers are largely about why that's a good thing, why there should be equality in society and how to really try to accomplish it, because otherwise the whole system will fall apart, like you're seeing today. Moving on, then, we want to think about these extremes that we're living in, where we see this very unstable system, where there isn't equal access to power, and so you see on both sides of the political aisle, both the Republicans and the Democrats have now taken to go to the streets because they aren't feeling like their voices are being heard in the political process. So this is very dangerous. This is a very bad sign for the system, and so you have to understand, if they're not able to participate in the political system, then they're going to participate in a different way. And that's really, I'm borrowing a quote there from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., is that protest is, a part of not being heard. It's nobody's listening to you, they're not representing you, and so you take it to the streets. And what you should see here is that the left has learned from the right. that the right had this phrasing that they were using for over 50 years about defunding things. And so the left learned that this is an efficient way of organizing people against the state, against the government. And so the best answers were the ones that showed that you understood that this is not unique, and that, you know, defund the police is not, it shouldn't be controversial, or it should be as controversial as the things that the Republicans have defunded, and yet you see, because of the unequal power relationships, one gets demonized and the other ones, you know, I think most of you probably just never pay attention to these other defund efforts. So then this leads us to this kind of dilemma then, is that, you know, idealistically or hopefully people were thinking, oh, the Patriot Act is going to protect, as George W. Bush said, us against evildoers. The problem is that the evildoers became the government, right? And so they started violating the law, which is well documented. And this leads then to a further exclusion of people who were already excluded from participating in the system. So again, the best answers here were those that identified groups of people who will and have been excluded from the political process. And so this leads to a complete unbalancing of the entire system. Then kind of going back to seeing, you know, how well you're able to work on the kind of writing and expression that the college is expecting of you, and that I'm supposed to be able to measure your improvement on in this course. So you were supposed to, in this question, identify a proposition, so a statement of facts, plus a difference. So this is really kind of like a reading comprehension plus your ability to write an argument. And so these are 4 good examples of how to do that. And so most of you were pretty good at the first part. You did a proposition. You were able to put forth something that could be true or false, right? That's what we meant by falsifiable. We can verify it. We can argue about the facts. So it's beyond an opinion, right? It's based in fact. And then, you know, the difference is where a lot of you had trouble. So I just pulled some examples here so you see how to do that, right? This requires what we call analysis in the education world. And then this was actually, I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better response here. This question about the Gitlow case. A lot of you actually got this case wrong, which makes me wonder if you read the case or if you might have tried to get some information from the internet, which is always unreliable. Try to remember, you know, you get what you pay for, so if it was free, then, you know, you probably got not great advice. So Gitlow was sent to prison for writing a pamphlet. And so this is pretty ridiculous if you think about, you know, if you go back to your American history, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet about overthrowing the government. So, you know, in the Revolutionary War. And so this is, you know, this would make the founders very uncomfortable that people were being put in prison for advocating for overthrowing the government. That's your right. If the government is not meeting your needs, then it's your right. Now, if you organize against the government and you form an army, well, now you're in a state of war, and so the government has the right to organize their army and go to war with you. But neither side has a right to deny the other side that opportunity. Otherwise, the American Revolution never would have happened. And same thing with the Civil War. And so, you know, just really understanding that this is a very extreme, radical case of the Supreme Court in saying that Gitlow doesn't have a First Amendment right. And then some of you focused on some of the nuances about the state and the federal government, you know, that really irrelevant to this particular issue. But, you know, again, like the best answers are the ones that kind of put together a argument, right? That have 3 or 4 clear sentences that build on top of each other. And this is really, again, what we're trying to get you to do in college in an introduction class. And another great model response from a student here. This is talking about, you know, what does this statement mean? So again, this is going to reading comprehension, but it was really also how well did you really understand the readings from week 2, and how are you processing this information? And so this was really, again, going back to the idea that, you know, a government in which the 2 parties are only representing the interests of a small elite few, which we call the powerful, is not the democratic system that was designed. And so it's very out of balance, and historically that's always been a problem. That leads to revolution, that leads to violence, it leads to demonstrations, right? It leads to chaos, as many people are concerned about. And so again, you should realize that that's the government that's creating that structure, right? They're the ones who are creating the chaos. And so a second system would be, it's better to break into smaller groups where people can talk to each other, can base their opinions on facts, and then they can come to agreements about what should be done based on their identities and their goals. The larger and more kind of out of hand things get, the less likely you're going to have participatory politics, and that's when you move into a totalitarian system or a dictatorship. Another great answers here about power and people understanding that it's not something that you have, you don't possess it. So if you look over here, this is kind of a strange way of showing you what it is, but power is the thing that is generated from the person here swinging this heavy ball around, right? And so power is the thing that arises from the system, right? So you don't hold it. The ball is the ball. It's not power, right? So you can hold the ball, but you can't hold the power. So you can hold a position, and that can generate power, but you don't get it. You don't get the position and then power is given to you. You have to do something with the structure, with the authority, with the position. And so this is really very good thinking when you think about it. The Civil Rights Act, right? So the Civil Rights Act empowered people to have a better life, right? But it was the people who empowered the Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act. In this situation with the Guatemalans, they had less power than somebody in America, and so Americans are taking advantage of that, right? So power is kind of a word we use to describe unequal relationships and what people do with those. Everyone did really well with this, I think. Well, not everyone, but almost everyone did very well with this, right? So you were able to see that this is an example of separation of powers based on what we call the administrative state, which is what the United States government is. This is why there's a danger of it being a dictatorship, is because we have a strong federal government. So in going back to the Federalist Papers that were argued at the founding of the country, lots of people were worried that the government would turn into a dictatorship because of this administrative power, this state system that they had. And so the idea was to separate the powers amongst the states, amongst the city, to have it as diffuse and participatory as possible. So the more people who participate in the government structure, the less likely it would get into the hands of the elite. The problem is that's obviously not the case today, right? The power is, these groups are working together now. So they were supposed to be working against each other, but now each of these, little circles you see here to the left, they're working with each other on behalf of a very small group of people. And so the fears that people had in 1788 are being seen today. So this is the dilemma that we have in American politics today. And so, I think this is just good that most of you are able to see this, and then you want to move to the next thing, is that the check of abuse of powers, again, so this violates the separation of powers, right? So checks and balances is not when they agree with each other. The check is supposed to stop another part of the government from doing something that's unconstitutional. So if there was actual checks and balances in the Gitlow case, they would have said, no, Gitlow is free to write a pamphlet. Right? Again, Gitlow is not free to organize a militia and then overthrow the government. Right? He can organize a military and then go to war. That's allowed, just like every other country can in the world. But what he can't do is expect that nothing's going to happen. He organizes a military and then the government says, oh, well, you win. Right? No. But he can write about it, right? So that should be the thing that he's allowed to do according to the Constitution. There's a provision in the Constitution if the government thinks that he was committing treason, then they can prosecute him for treason. But writing a pamphlet is not treason. And so, the Supreme Court violated the checks and balances doctrine, which again, it's not a law, it's just a principle, it's a philosophy that some people think is a good way to make sure that there's participatory democracy. So in this case, you can see the Supreme Court wasn't interested in participatory democracy. And so, the answers that showed that you understand this, those are the ones that got the A's. Now this leads us to the dilemma of opposing Americans, right? You have two groups of Americans that are saying that the system is the problem. On one level, this is great, because this means that people are engaged in critical analysis. They're thinking about all of the obvious problems with the American system. And they've got opinions about it. the problem is that they're polar, right? The Black Lives Matter movement is interested in equality. They want everyone to have equal rights. Those on the right, however, those that are saying, you will not replace us, are racist, right? They're saying that they feel like they're being replaced by Jews and immigrants and other people that they find to be less than, right? And so you've got white supremacy on one side, and then you've got equality on the other side. But you should think this makes sense, right? I mean, if the system is broken and people don't have access to participate, then the two extremes are going to be the most visible. They're going to be the loudest. And so you see that now growing more and more and more, right? And this is the dilemma of when your government system becomes unequal. This is what you should expect to see. This is what we've seen in other countries throughout history. So I'm worried, a lot of you had a hard time with this one, and so, I'm not sure why that is, but so this comes from the Patriot Act, and because the Supreme Court has never ruled this to be unconstitutional, then the answer is it's constitutional. And so most of you got this wrong, which probably to me tells me that 25% of you thinks this is unconstitutional, and that's fine, right? That's your opinion, but it's not a fact, right? So it'd be a fact if the Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional. But because it comes from the constitutional delegated power to the Congress to pass this law, then it is constitutional until somebody says it's otherwise. These other answers, I don't know what you read into these. But, again, right, if an act is passed by Congress, then it's constitutional until the Supreme Court says otherwise. So finally, you just want to think about, why we're in the situation we're in. And again, these two kind of graphics tells you everything. Only 25% of Americans feel like the government represents them, right? That's terrible. I mean, 75% of the country believes that the government does not have their best interests in reality. And I think this is obvious, right? Isn't it? It's probably obvious to you, right? The government seems to be really disconnected from our everyday lives. That's very bad. That's not what you want your government system to be in a land of constitutional democracy. So there's two things that really stand out as being problems. One is this problem of gerrymandering, right, where Republicans have made areas that look ridiculous, right? So they've changed maps so that they make sure all their voters are in their area so that they never lose. And Democrats have done the same thing. And so this is why you see red and blue America, right, is that you don't have people. Ordinarily, if we just did it based on geography, you'd have a mixture of people who are Republicans and Democrats, and then they'd have to talk to each other. They'd have to agree on what facts are. They'd have to build policies and compromise with each other. And then you'd have a system that's promoting cooperation. What the parties have done here is they've created two separate systems that are fighting against each other. Sounds a whole lot like the Civil War time, but it also sounds a whole lot like the American Revolutionary time. Right, where you have two groups that basically cannot seem to get along with each other, and so they're thinking they'd just rather have their own governments, and they're ready to fight it out. And again, I think one student who, I think it's great that you said you're not a political guy, but you're showing that you're starting to understand politics really well, is that this other problem is the filibuster, and this rule of cloture that it makes it impossible to vote on anything. So one of the major reasons why nothing gets done in Congress is that Congress created rules so that they don't have to get anything done. And then so now you see why Americans don't feel Congress represents them. We all have to work very hard. Congress doesn't seem to have to work very hard at all. In fact, they've worked very hard not to work. And so, this is really the issue that we're all working with, is that the rules that the Congress has made for themselves, right? These aren't constitutional, they're not laws. These are just rules that they've all agreed on. In addition to gerrymandering, have created for a very polarized system. So it's not that the country is polarized, the government is polarized. And so the government then creates a polarized country. And so this is what you have to understand now for U.S. politics. And then for the remaining weeks, we have the terrible task, right, the very difficult task of trying to figure out, well, how do we start participating with each other and using facts? And that's what you're going to be practicing for the next few weeks. In a system that seems to not care about facts and doesn't care about people agreeing with each other. So we're going to try to figure that problem out, and you're going to try to learn how to do that in the using evidence and referring to things that you find. So this is just a way of helping you understand both the exam. I gave you some examples of good answers, and so how much your answer differed from question to question, right? That's what determines your grade. And then this is to help you also think about the remainder of the semester and what should kind of focus on